The Zurvath vessel. Vorak's spear cut through the cosmic veil, its blackened hull absorbing the dim glow of distant stars as it coasted toward the target. Inside the command deck, Commander Varrock Nal's slitted eyes tracked the heads-up display, his elongated fingers tapping against the armrest in thought. "Confirm the anomaly," he ordered, his voice edged with expectation rather than concern. The Terrans were a reckless breed, primitive, volatile. Yet for reasons beyond logic, intelligence reports insisted they were constructing warships far exceeding their technological bracket. A pulse of violet light rippled across the display as Lieutenant Orek Sal, the ship's lead analyst, initiated a full-spectrum scan of the human vessel ahead. The readouts should have presented nothing alarming: conventional shielding, outdated fusion cores, archaic projectile-based weapons. But the screen pulsed red. "Sir," Orek's mandibles twitched, his exoskeletal frame stiffening. This cannot be right." Varrock narrowed his eyes. "Clarify." "The readings—" Orek's fingers danced across the console, adjusting parameters. "Their hull isn't standard reinforced plating. It's layered with some adaptive alloy that's actively dispersing energy signatures. I'm detecting kinetic barrier fluctuations I've never seen before." His voice cracked with something alien to Zurvath officers: uncertainty. Varrock leaned forward, his crest stiffening. "Continue." The display flashed again, recalibrating as the scan sank deeper into the ship's systems. The ISS Aegis wasn't just armored. It was a moving fortress, a construct designed not for domination, but endurance. "By the gods," Orek whispered, "those power readings, they match the classified wreckage from the Expanse." Varrock's blood ran cold. The Expanse. A stretch of void where the Zurvath had found ships ripped apart in ways that defied explanation, as if the hulls had been turned inside out, the crews erased from existence rather than slain. No known species had ever claimed responsibility. The Zurvath had buried the findings deep within restricted archives, and yet, here it was, the same energy, thrumming from the heart of a Terran warship. His thoughts barely had time to settle before the Vorak's spear shuddered beneath them. The lights flickered, the readouts scrambled. "Counter-intrusion detected!" shouted Weapons Officer Jorek Khan. "Sir, they know we're here!" Varrock's command instinct took over. "Cut the scan! Fall back!" But it was too late. The heads-up display crackled, then froze, the alien symbols warping as an unfamiliar presence hijacked their frequency. The bridge crew tensed as the image of a human materialized, his sharp gaze cutting through the static. Fleet Commander Gregor Vaskov. His face was eerily calm. Too calm. "You should not have done that," Vaskov said, his voice void of urgency. "You scanned something you were not meant to understand." Varrock forced himself to maintain composure. "This is a routine reconnaissance mission. You are in neutral space." "No." Vaskov's tone was final. "You are trespassing in a war you don't even realize has begun." Static fractured the connection for a moment. When Vaskov spoke again, there was a weight behind his words that carried more than just a warning. It carried consequence. "You're centuries too late. We fight in the dark, alone. And if you don't prepare, you'll be next." The transmission cut. The Vorak's spear lurched violently, alarms screeching as the ship's internal systems fluctuated erratically. The energy surge didn't originate from Aegis. No external weapons had fired. "Engineering report!" Varrock barked. "Sir!" The chief engineer's voice trembled through the comms. "The ship's own power grid is destabilizing. It's like something turned our output against us." Orek's screen warped, his digits flicking across the display in rapid succession. This isn't human technology." The Vorak's spear spun away from the Terran vessel, its engines sputtering as energy spikes tore through the circuitry. Vaskov had let them leave, but he had done something to their systems. Varrock didn't have time to analyze what. He only knew one thing. "Get us out of here," he ordered. The Zurvath vessel punched into high warp, vanishing into the void. The escape was not victory. Varrock sat in his quarters, his digits clasped as he reviewed the fragmented data. The power emissions from Aegis were still unstable, fluctuating even within the ship's secured archives, as though the information itself resisted containment. He exhaled slowly. The War Council had to hear of this. Humanity had transcended mere technological advancement. They were preparing for something the Zurvath were not ready for. The overhead comms chirped unexpectedly. "Commander," came the voice of Communications Officer Turnos Vec. "We have an incoming transmission. Outer Rim Station Tryon 5 Varrock frowned. That was a remote observation outpost. No active engagement. No military value." "Patch it through." Static flooded the speakers. Then, a voice. A Zurvath officer's. Distorted. Panicked. "Is anyone receiving... This is... Tryon 5. Unknown presence. Sensors failing. Structure integrity." A high-pitched shriek of interference ripped through the channel, followed by silence. Then, in the eerie stillness, something shifted through the audio, a low, rhythmic pulse. Not static, not random, a signal, repeating. And then, words formed. Varrock froze as the message translated itself. "They are awake," the transmission cut. Varrock stared at the console, feeling the weight of something he couldn't name settle in his chest. It was not a warning. It was a statement of fact. And the Zurvath were already too late. Varrock Nal's stride was rigid, his mind a battlefield of spiraling thoughts. The corridors of the Zurvath High Command Citadel curved unnaturally, their polished surfaces reflecting the glow of embedded plasma lines. A structure built to intimidate, to remind lesser species of their place. But for the first time in his long career, intimidation was useless. He marched past the honor guards without acknowledgement, his focus locked ahead. The War Council had to listen. Humanity was not rising. They were bracing. For what he did not yet understand. The council chamber loomed before him, its entrance sealed by an archaic locking mechanism. The great doors slid open as he approached, revealing 13 warlords seated in a circular chamber, their elongated forms draped in ceremonial battlecloth. Grand Warlord Solus Drake sat at the highest tier, his golden eyes narrowing at Varrock's approach. "You return in haste," Drake mused, his voice deliberate, layered with condescension. "Tell me, Commander, do the Terrans tremble before the might of Zurvath?" Varrock ignored the taunt. He placed his data core onto the central console, activating a laser plasma projection. The image of ISS Aegis flickered into existence, the ship's abnormal energy fluctuations unmistakable. "This vessel," Varrock stated, "is beyond anything we have encountered. It is not built for conquest. It is designed to survive an enemy we do not yet comprehend." Murmurs rippled across the chamber, a mix of intrigue and amusement. Warlord Threx Omaz, the Council's foremost strategist, leaned forward. "You are rattled, Nal. I expected better." He gestured at the projection, dismissive. "The Terrans have always been desperate creatures. Their paranoia is commendable, but it is not our concern." Varrock stiffened. "Their technology suggests otherwise. We scanned their ship." "And there's your first mistake," Threx interrupted smoothly. "You should not have wasted time scanning. You should have destroyed it." Laughter rumbled through the chamber, but Varrock did not waver. He turned to Cass Lauren, the intelligence overseer, who had been silently watching from the shadows. Unlike the warlords, Lauren was not a warrior but an observer, a collector of secrets. Cass finally spoke. "The readings, they are not exclusive to humanity." A weighted silence followed. The projection shifted, revealing another set of data, an unclassified wreckage site beyond known space. Varroc's throat tightened. It was the same signature. Drake exhaled, the subtle shift in his posture betraying a flicker of unease. "You are implying a connection." Cass nodded. "There are anomalies along the outer rim that defy known physics. We have dismissed them as failed experiments, relics of forgotten empires. But now, we find that Terrans, of all species, have engineered vessels that align with those same signatures." Threx scoffed. "Then we take action before they surpass us. The humans have always lacked restraint. This is no different. We should strike Earth now, before they bring war to our doorstep." Varrock slammed his fist against the control panel. "You are missing the point." His voice echoed against the polished walls, reverberating with frustration. "They are not preparing to wage war against us. They are holding the line against something else." Drake's golden eyes locked onto him, studying, calculating. "Tell me, Varrock," he said, voice quieter now, more measured. "If what you claim is true, why has humanity said nothing? Why have they not sought alliances? Why have they hidden this war?" The answer was already in Varrock's mind, but the weight of it made his chest tighten. "Because they don't trust us," he admitted. "Because we would not believe them." A heavy silence settled in the chamber. Then the stillness was shattered. The chamber's emergency alert system blared to life, the walls flashing with crimson warnings. A transmission forced its way onto the central display. The connection was weak, garbled, yet the voice that broke through was Zurvath. A station commander. "Is anyone receiving?" The voice trembled, distorted by unknown interference. "Tryon 5, outer rim compromised, detection arrays, failing." A sudden static-laced shriek ripped through the transmission, followed by silence. Then something else emerged. Not static, not interference, a pattern, a signal. It pulsed, slow, deliberate, and then words formed. "They are awake." The chamber froze. Cass Loren's hands trembled at his sides, his analytical mind failing to provide reason. Threx Omaz, for all his arrogance, said nothing. Varrock turned to Drake, watching the warlord's expression shift into something close to realization. But before the silence could settle, another alert flashed onto the display. A Zurvath fleet had already been dispatched. Threx had acted, without permission. "You fool!" Varrock's fury erupted. "You sent them blindly, against a force we do not understand." Threx Omaz rose from his seat, his expression defiant. "They will prove your fears unfounded," he sneered. "The Terrans have hidden for too long. We will uncover their deception and expose their weakness." Varrock's claws curled at his sides. He turned to Cass Loren, who stood frozen before the transmission logs. "Where was Tryon 5's last location?" Cass's voice was barely a whisper. "Human territory." The chamber darkened as the final transmission faded into nothingness, and far beyond Zurvath space, the dispatched fleet moved forward. They expected to find answers. What awaited them was something far worse. They should have answered by now. Fleet Commander Kovek Thrall loomed over the heads-up display, his slitted pupils narrowing as he studied the barren world below. The Zurvath fleet hovered at the edge of an abandoned Terran colony, its structures eerily intact. No signs of destruction, no lingering wreckage, yet not a single life signature detected. "This isn't right," murmured Torin Vesk, his ship's lead tactician. "Even in a retreat, they would have left something. Debris, distress beacons, remnants of defense systems. This place is—" He hesitated. Thrale's voice was sharp. "Say it." Vesk exhaled slowly. "It's hollow, like it was stripped clean." A tremor passed through the fleet. "Commander, we're detecting fluctuations in subspace," reported Sensor Officer Kelth Arn, his eyes darting between fluctuating readings. "These signals, they match the anomaly we dismissed from Tryon 5. Thrall's mandibles tightened. "Open a channel to the War Council. Let them know the situation is—" The ship shuddered violently. Alarms shrieked through the bridge as readouts plunged into chaos. Communication links fractured. The energy signatures mutated into something unnatural. No stable pattern, no source of origin. The colony below blurred, as if the landscape itself had begun to shift. And then the lights dimmed. Not from a power failure. Not from an attack. Something was draining them. "Sir," Vesk's voice caught. "We're losing power. Not from an external strike. Something is unraveling our systems." The Zurvath fleet, built upon the technological supremacy of its race, began to deteriorate before a single shot had been fired. A shadow moved against the black sky. Not a ship, not a form they recognized. It had no solid edges, no consistent structure, only a writhing presence that flickered in and out of existence, as if reality itself struggled to define it. Thrall felt a sensation he had never known, not fear, not confusion, but a deep and unnatural wrongness. The first ship collapsed inward on itself, its hull imploding with no sound, no explosion, only a sickening reversal of matter. The Zurvath crew's final transmissions abruptly cut, as if they had never existed. "Fire!" Thrall barked. "Target whatever that is!" Energy lances erupted from Zurvath cannons, streaking toward the void where the presence had emerged. The bolts connected, then simply vanished. No impact, no resistance, as if the weapons had been erased mid-flight. A second ship fractured. Its surface peeled away, exposing the skeletal remains of its superstructure before something pulled it apart, atom by atom. Thrall's throat tightened. This was no battle. This was consumption. Then, something new arrived. The Zurvath flagship's heads-up display flickered with an unauthorized signal. A vessel descended through the darkness, its silhouette monstrous against the backdrop of unraveling warships. Its angular structure bore no resemblance to the flickering presence, yet it moved with the precision of something that had fought these things before. A voice cut through the bridge comms. "You're in the wrong place." It was human. Admiral Dane Voskar, leader of the Terran Black Fleet. The Aegis and its sister ships emerged from the void, their hulls layered with energy fields, unlike anything the Zurvath had encountered. The alien presence recoiled, flickering with agitation as the Terran ships activated something buried deep in their core systems. A pulse, low, heavy, resonant. The Zurvath fleet's failing systems stabilized in an instant. The void quivered, the unnatural presence twisting, its edges fluctuating erratically. It was in pain. Whatever humanity had just activated, it wounded the entity, and for the first time, Thrall saw something that should not have been possible. The void recoiled. The Zurvath commander's breath came slow, deliberate. He watched as the entity writhed, its flickering tendrils curling inward. A force that had shattered warships in moments was now faltering, not from brute strength, but from something else. Thrall turned to Vesk. "What did they do?" Vesk's eyes remained on the display. "They built countermeasures." His voice was tight, uncertain. "And those countermeasures were not made for us. The Terran ships did not attack. They simply held the line." Voskar's voice returned, measured but sharp. "You should have stayed away." Thrall's mandibles clicked in frustration. "You act as if this is routine. What are you fighting? What is this?" A beat of silence. Then, "This war isn't new. We've been losing for centuries." The Zurvath bridge fell into silence. This wasn't the discovery of an enemy. This was the realization that humanity had been waging a war the rest of the galaxy had never even noticed. Thrall exhaled slowly, his claws tightening at his sides. "We need to return to Zurvath space," he said finally. "They need to see this." Voskar did not acknowledge him. Instead, the human fleet moved alongside the crippled Zurvath vessels, guiding them back rather than destroying them. An act of mercy, an act that carried a warning, and as the Zurvath fleet limped away, Thrall knew one thing. This was not over. Varrock Nal stepped into the War Council chamber, the weight of inevitability pressing against his chest. The room, a sanctum of Zurvath military dominance, felt smaller than before, suffocating in its arrogance. 13 warlords sat in a circular formation, their elaborate robes more ceremonial than practical. They had ruled through dominance for centuries, dictating wars as if they were distant abstractions. Today, war had come to their doorstep, and they refused to see it. He set the data core onto the console, his claws steady despite the chaos in his mind. The laser plasma display flickered to life, revealing the fragmented transmissions from the Zurvath fleet that had barely returned from the edge of human space. Unnatural distortions, warships disintegrating, an enemy that did not fight in traditional terms, but unmade everything it touched. Solus Drake, seated at the highest tier, exhaled slowly, his golden eyes narrowing. "Explain this." Varrock's voice was sharper than before. "The enemy we feared does not march in fleets. It does not conquer in ways you understand. It erases. We assumed humanity was amassing weapons for war against us. We were wrong. They were building against something else." Silence stretched. The other warlords exchanged glances, some dismissive, others hesitant. Threx Omaz, the ever-arrogant strategist, leaned forward with cold skepticism. "And yet the humans live. Convenient, don't you think?" His fingers tapped against the console. "If these entities are as formidable as you claim, then why has humanity not fallen? Why have they not been consumed?" The answer came not from Varrock, but from the shadows. Cass Loren stepped into the light, his frame lean, his presence like a specter weaving through the room. Unlike the warlords, he did not command fleets. He commanded knowledge. "They were meant to," Cass said. "By all logic, they should have." He moved to the display, inserting his own encrypted data core. The image shifted. Zurvath Deep Space Intelligence logs, classified intercepts spanning decades. The council leaned in, their arrogance flickering as undeniable patterns emerged. Humanity had stopped expanding centuries ago. Their colonies were not outposts of conquest, but fortresses. They had not warred with their neighbors, not out of peace, but because they were diverting their entire military structure into survival. "We assumed they were primitive, because they did not take what was offered," Cass continued, his voice like a scalpel cutting through the delusions of the chamber. "But they were not ignorant. They were watching, studying. And when the first anomalies surfaced, when the first deep space ships began vanishing, they did not call for help. They did not wait for allies." He turned, his gaze cutting through the warlords. They dug in. Varrock watched the shift in the room, the first stirrings of fear. "Enough," Solus Drake muttered, though his voice lacked its usual weight. His gaze lingered on the display a moment longer before turning to Varrock. "If humanity has truly been fighting this enemy, then we need to know how." The chamber doors hissed open. Varrock Nal stepped into the War Council chamber, the weight of inevitability pressing against his chest. The room, a sanctum of Zurvath military dominance, felt smaller than before, suffocating in its arrogance. 13 warlords sat in a circular formation, their elaborate robes more ceremonial than practical. They had ruled through dominance for centuries, dictating wars as if they were distant abstractions. Today, war had come to their doorstep, and they refused to see it. He set the data core onto the console, his claws steady despite the chaos in his mind. The laser plasma display flickered to life, revealing the fragmented transmissions from the Zurvath fleet that had barely returned from the edge of human space. Unnatural distortions, warships disintegrating, an enemy that did not fight in traditional terms, but unmade everything it touched. Solus Drake, seated at the highest tier, exhaled slowly, his golden eyes narrowing. "Explain this." Varrock's voice was sharper than before. The enemy we feared does not march in fleets. It does not conquer in ways you understand. It erases. We assumed humanity was amassing weapons for war against us. We were wrong. They were building against something else. Silence stretched. The other warlords exchanged glances, some dismissive, others hesitant. Threx Omaz, the ever-arrogant strategist, leaned forward with cold skepticism. And yet the humans live. Convenient, don't you think? His fingers tapped against the console. If these entities are as formidable as you claim, then why has humanity not fallen? Why have they not been consumed? The answer came not from Varrock, but from the shadows. Cass Loren stepped into the light, his frame lean, his presence like a specter weaving through the room. Unlike the warlords, he did not command fleets. He commanded knowledge. They were meant to, Cass said. By all logic, they should have. He moved to the display, inserting his own encrypted data core. The image shifted. Zervath Deep Space Intelligence logs, classified intercepts spanning decades. The Council leaned in, their arrogance flickering as undeniable patterns emerged. Humanity had stopped expanding centuries ago. Their colonies were not outposts of conquest, but fortresses. They had not warred with their neighbors, not out of peace, but because they were diverting their entire military structure into survival. We assumed they were primitive, because they did not take what was offered, Cass continued, his voice like a scalpel cutting through the delusions of the chamber. But they were not ignorant. They were watching, studying. And when the first anomalies surfaced, when the first deep space ships began vanishing, they did not call for help. They did not wait for allies. He turned, his gaze cutting through the warlords. They dug in. Varrock watched the shift in the room, the first stirrings of fear. Enough, Solus Drake muttered, though his voice lacked its usual weight. His gaze lingered on the display a moment longer before turning to Varrock. If humanity has truly been fighting this enemy, then we need to know how. The chamber doors hissed open, not from Zervath space, from somewhere deeper. The council chamber fell into darkness, and through the speakers, the message translated itself. We are coming. They're here. Varrock Nal's voice barely rose above a whisper. The transmission from the Deep Space Listening Post still flickered on the War Council's laser plasma display, the looping message reverberating through the chamber like a death knell. We are coming. But they were no longer coming. They had arrived. The Zervath homeworld's orbital defense grid flared to life, its targeting systems locking onto disturbances rippling through the void, distortions that refused to be measured, tracked, or understood. The stars themselves seemed to warp, as if something enormous pressed against the very fabric of space, folding reality to accommodate its presence. Solus Drake rose from his throne, his golden eyes locked on the display. Deploy all fleets. Now. Cass Loren was already at his station, routing emergency commands. We're detecting multiple incursions along our outer colonies, Zervath and Terran sectors alike. They're striking everywhere at once. Varrock clenched his jaw. They were never scouting. They were waiting for a threshold. The moment humanity and Zervath acknowledged them, the moment they became aware of what lurked beyond, the war had already been lost. A Zervath battleship disintegrated mid-orbit. No impact, no weapons fired. One moment a war machine stood, then it was an absence, a scar in the void where something had unmade it. Gregor Vaskov watched from the bridge of the ISS Aegis, his officers working in disciplined silence around him. The Black Fleet had already mobilized Fortress-class warships forming interlocking defensive grids across the outer colonies. Still, it was not enough. Enemy signatures? Vaskov asked. The sensor chief's fingers twitched against the display. Reading them is impossible. We're detecting fluctuations instead of mass. Vaskov exhaled slowly. They're not ships. No hulls, no bridges, not constructs of metal and fire. These were things born from entropy itself. Admiral Dane Voskar's voice cut through the secure line. They're breaching every known perimeter. We can't hold everywhere at once. Vaskov knew it was the truth. Humanity had prepared for a war against extinction, but even their darkest projections had underestimated what was coming. A Zurvath fleet attempted a counterstrike, their energy lances igniting the dark. For a moment, it looked as if their weapons connected. Then the light was swallowed, absorbed by something beyond physics. Zurvath battlecruisers vanished in eerie silence, their commanders still issuing orders as their bodies unraveled. Varrock voice crackled through the secure channel. We're being consumed. Then fall back. Varrock stiffened. You expect us to retreat? Not retreat, Vaskov said. Regroup. The Zurvath had never known a war like this. Their doctrine was built on overwhelming firepower, on strength projected across the stars. But this enemy didn't care for strength. It fed on it. Vaskov turned to his weapons officer. Begin planetary defense activations. The command was relayed. Across the Terran front, battle stations powered up, interlocked kinetic barriers cycling into defensive alignments. But defense alone would not win this. Prepare our final measure. The bridge crew stilled. Sir, his second-in-command said carefully, are you sure? Vaskov's eyes hardened. We always knew we'd have to use it. A final fail-safe. One that humanity had prayed they would never need. The Zurvath War Council watched as their fleets collapsed under the weight of an enemy that could not be fought conventionally. Solace Drake's composure fractured as he turned to Varrock. Tell me you have a plan. Varrock's claws curled into the table's edge. Not mine. A signal came through the chamber. Terran encryption. Vaskov's face materialized. His expression was not one of desperation, but resolution. You want to survive? He asked. Then listen carefully, because this is the part where you follow our lead. For the first time in Zurvath history, the War Council took orders from an outsider. The ISS Aegis maneuvered into position, its systems rerouting all available energy into the planetary-scale weapon network. Zurvath and Terran fleets aligned in formation, warships firing in carefully coordinated bursts to disrupt enemy materialization points. It was not about destruction, it was about stalling, long enough for the final weapon to come online. A Zurvath colony fell in an instant, not to an invasion, but to a force that erased its very existence. No wreckage, no fire, only an empty space where millions had lived. Varrock's voice cut through the command link. We're out of time. Vaskov nodded once. Engage! Across the sector, the pre-planted detonation cores ignited. A full Terran colony, one of their strongest fortresses, was sacrificed in an instant. But it was not in vain. The energy surge rippled outward, the destabilization disrupting the entity's hold on physical space. Across the battlefield, they began to recoil, flickering as the weapon's wave ripped into the distortions they existed within. For the first time in history, they felt pain. The void trembled. And then they withdrew. Not gone, not defeated, but forced to pull back. Varrock stood in the aftermath, staring at the ruined stretch of space where a Terran world had once existed. Gregor Vaskov stepped beside him. The human's eyes carried no triumph, only resolve. You still think we're your enemy? Vaskov asked. Varrock did not answer, because now he understood. They had been at war before they even knew the enemy existed, and humanity had stood alone. Not anymore. Kaz Loren approached, his hands clutching a new transmission. It's not over, he said. They're retreating, but they're not done. Varrock lifted his gaze to Vaskov. What now? Vaskov's expression was unreadable. Now, he said quietly, we prepare for the next wave. The Zurvath had spent centuries believing they were superior. That belief had shattered in a single battle, and as the survivors gathered, they all knew the truth. This was only the first. The real war begins now,